Hello and welcome. I'm Philip Gazala. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, following the Chancellor's budget last week, it was thought that it would be a good idea to have a debrief on the country house market. So I'm delighted to be joined with an expert panel to take us through the intricacies of what developed last week and how they see the future. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got Matthew and Ed from Withers of London, the lawyer firm, and also Poppy and Ben from the Country House Department. I think it'd be a good idea if we started with each of you just telling us a little bit about your roles in the process of buying and selling property. Matthew, let's start with you.
Thank you, Philip. I'm Matthew Woods and I've been at Withers now for 26 years and I work in the private client department. My role is really the trusted advisor to families, and most of them will have a country property of some shape or form, whether it's a house, a farm or an estate. My involvement is really in helping advise them on the longer term ownership, and I look at inheritance tax with them, capital gains tax, and also help advise on stamp taxes. Often these are properties that will pass down the generation, and so that's very much where I get involved on the succession side.
Hi there, my name's Ed Jarron. I'm a partner at Withers. I've been in the private property team now for 15 years and I've had the pleasure of advising a complete range of national and international clients, both their families and businesses. I generally work in the property sector and advise clients mainly on country house acquisitions and disposals, but also on larger transactions involving farms and estates.
I'm Poppy Chenowicz-Trench and I work for the Country House Department. I cover Essex and Suffolk for them. I've worked in the industry for about 15 years and we focus on prime country houses.
And I'm Ben Bentley, co-founder of the Country House Department. I've worked within the industry for 12 years, but co-founded the Country House Department with my business partner Andrew Russell, which we launched just over 5.5 years ago. We specialise in the top end of the country house market. We are very much quality over quantity. We've got a superb team, one of which is sitting next to me, of 18, all held senior roles at some of the more established firms. And it's very much about client care. Every sale that we do has one point of contact who looks after the entire process. We've got a superb team, in-house creative team, who focus on the marketing of the properties, and we really sort of capture what it is about living in some of these superb properties.
Thank you very much. Poppy, before we go into the different aspects of what happened with the Chancellor's budget, give us an overview of how you've seen the market in the last 18 months.
I think the best way to describe the market over the last 18 months is stop-start. We've had highs, we've had lows. At the beginning, we had a new government who were finding their feet, and then people got used to that, and we got going. And then we had a great start to the year, really busy, some lovely houses coming on, great buyers looking, and then Trump came in with his tariffs, which made people have a bit of a wobble. We then found our feet again, and then on the positive side, interest rates were coming down, mortgage rates were looking much better, and things were going again, and we had a great summer. Then we had the long run up to the budget, which really did throw some people. But equally, on the positive side, there were some really keen, good buyers out there who wanted to buy before the budget. And there's a lot of sort of information out there, information overload. But actually, they just wanted to cut through that and get to exchange and completion. So actually, we had a really good couple of months. But it has been like this over the last 18 months for sure. And advising clients correctly on pricing has been key.
Poppy, do you think that you had buyers that were trying to get completed by the budget because they were concerned about what might be coming?
Yes, definitely. Okay. That was definitely what.
So on that note, Ed, let's just come to you. One of the first announcements reflecting on the country house sales in this country was this new idea, which they call the mansion tax. Can you tell us a little bit what impact that might have?
It's a good question. I think looking back, prior to the budget, there were a lot of potential changes that might have happened. For example, there could have been changes to PPR, there could have been complete removal of SDLT in its entirety. And I think we felt that SDLT might be open for attack because if you look back over the last year or so, we've seen that the government introduced new rules to remove multiple dwellings relief, which was always a good lever to reduce the amount of SDLT payable on country house transactions. We've also seen an increase in the surcharge rates where people are buying second properties. So I think, with that in mind, we felt that SDLT might be an open target, but interestingly, we didn't see that this time around.
I think one of the things that a lot of our clients are seeing is actually the costs of acquiring a property are very, very significant. We've got 15% stamp duty land tax. If you've got a surcharge as well of 5%, if you're a non-resident, it keeps going up and up and up. And I've seen a number of clients who 20 years ago would never have dreamed of renting a property, and they've looked at it and said, well, actually, I need this property in the country for probably 10 years. It's not a long-term hold. And they're very seriously looking at renting property. I've had a client not too far from here who actually just sold his farm, and they can't find a property that they want to buy in the area and the locality, so they're renting off a nearby estate. And he's saying he's actually really enjoying the fact that he hasn't got all his money tied up in the house, and the acquisition costs would have been very significant. He's at one end of his life, and he's actually pretty happy renting, and the burden when something goes wrong picks up the phone to the agent and they come round and fix it. So I think we are going to see some distortions in the market, and I think if SDLT had gone up again, it would have been another slowdown because in terms of transactions. And I think one of the things we will see is that if you push it too far, the actual rates of the actual amount of money that is raised by the exchequer will fall. And so I think it's always a difficult balancing act. But that said, quite often we've seen the Labour Party say, well, we're not interested in whether we get more money in the door. It's all about principle.
Matthew, another subject that's been in the press a lot over the last 18 months is inheritance tax, which has particularly affected estates and farms. Has anything new come out about that?
There have been a couple of tweaks to the rules in the sense that the nil rate band has been frozen now for even longer. So the £325,000 on which no one pays any tax is there for a longer period of time. So inflation over the last 10 plus years is bringing more and more people into a charge for inheritance tax. There's been very little movement in relation to the reduction in agricultural and business property relief. So from April of next year, a farm that would otherwise have qualified for 100% relief will find only 50% relief. It's been called the unaffordable tax because often these farms are marginal in terms of income, and whilst they can pay the tax over a 10-year period, there isn't sufficient profit to do so. They have allowed the £1 million allowance, which is the amount on which no inheritance tax is paid, to roll over to a spouse if one is married. But apart from that, they're sticking to their guns. I do know anecdotally that various people have gone to the Treasury and provided reports to say that this is going to be a disaster economically and will actually reduce taxes. But it seems that the Labour Party are very fixated with this as being a point of principle. And so it's probably no surprise there was no relaxation there. I think the important point is if you are buying a country property with some agricultural land, it's to make sure that you maximise that relief and ensure that you qualify. And because there is £1 million allowance, and there is also 50% on the balance of that. But it's important to make sure you satisfy the rules.
Have you seen a significant uptake in people coming to you asking about that and wanting to take advice?
We have, and a lot of that are people who already own agricultural property and land, and we've still got till April where there may be some planning opportunities to either pass value on before April and before the changes come. But again, it's all this uncertainty, and I think what people have found pretty invidious is the fact that for 32 years you've had a particular regime that has applied, and then overnight it has been blown apart. And for people who are at the wrong end of the age spectrum, it gives them very little room for manoeuvre. And so again, a lack of fairness.
Did they introduce any restrictions on gifting?
No, that was widely speculated as being something where there might be a cap on the amount that could be given away, or the 7-year rule would be extended to a longer period of time. So all of those rules still apply. You can pretty much give away limitless amounts as long as there is So again, you can pretty much give away limitless amounts subject to things such as capital gains tax and other tax considerations, which, whilst that sounds generous, has to be seen in the context of a very mean inheritance tax allowance that I just mentioned of $325,000. If you're living in the United States of America, you've got a $15 million exemption, and so these, you've got to put these things in context.
And of course, the other aspect of that, and you did touch on this, Matthew, was that properties that have been perhaps in a family for 2 or 3 or more generations, whilst 100 years ago there might have been £30,000, they're now worth 3 million. Of course, it's by default you're just being stung by that. There's nothing you can do about it.
No, exactly, and the rhetoric about this was not going to impact on the vast majority of farmers. I think was the strap line is just not true. You can look at the costs of machinery, seed, crops in the ground. If you're a dairy farmer, the parlour, all of that is going to push you into well beyond the £1 million, the investment that those people have made into their farm. And so they will be paying tax. And as I mentioned, it's unaffordable for many people who are at that marginal end of farming.
Thank you, Matthew. Ben, Poppy, moving on to the marketplace. We've heard about what's been dubbed the mansion tax. We've heard about increased tax on rentals. Ben, perhaps you could start. How do you see this affecting the market going forward, if indeed it will affect the market going forward?
Interestingly, I don't think this will have a big effect on the market. We can't get away from the fact that the surcharge on properties over 2 million combined with the current stamp duty structure do represent significant costs. I don't believe sellers are making decisions based on that. I think they're making wide decisions based on aspects such as life planning, schooling, whether or not they want to upsize, downsize. I don't think marginal increases on tax implications will have an effect on whether or not they actually want to sell. That said, the last 2 years, and going back to Poppy's point earlier, have been unpredictable. There's no doubt there will be those that will have sat on their hands and not done anything because the buyer confidence hasn't been there. But I think looking ahead, we know where we stand. Therefore, people may now make the decision, it's the time to sell.
And I think the same with buyers as well. I think the clarity that they now have, they know what they're in for. And yes, it is a significant amount of money, but in the big scheme of things, it's not monumental. And I think actually having the clarity of knowing what they're in for will make them think, right, let's get on and get this moving. Let's stop sitting on our hands, which we've been doing for the best part of 2 years, and actually get on and start buying.
There's no doubt there are those that I think sit and wait in the hope the market's going to drastically pick up and price is going to increase. I think we are now at a level where it was probably sort of the market behaves now like it did pre-COVID, where it's pretty steady. We're not seeing these peaks in prices and sudden drops. So I think we know where we stand. And yes, people can sit and wait in the hope that there'll be something that'll change the market, but we can't see what that will be. So I think for the time being, we are where we are. So if you're of the mindset, do you want to sell? I think now's as good a time as any to get cracking.
And I think also that there's probably been a sort of compounding effect over the last 2 years where people have sat on their hands. And actually life goes on and it doesn't wait. And you have to make the decision to either sell or buy. And things happen. There can be other factors, death, divorce, disputes, which are all driving factors. And these things can be sort of resisted, but there does come a point where you reach a sort of equilibrium when actually the time's right just to get on and make the decision.
I agree.
And I think there was so much negative press in the market. This could have been so much worse. So actually, what we've got, best case.
I agree. I think we should have got away lightly.
Crack on, and they know what they're in for, as I said. So
one of my US partners referred to it as the dog that didn't bark, and which I thought was interesting. But as you say, I think there's been so much leaked about potential wealth taxes and so forth that, as you say, a £5,000 annual charge is unwelcome. But once you've got that certainty and that clarity, you know what's happening, then I think you can move forward. I think Ed mentioned earlier that there's always the opportunity to start edging that up, and that's I think the thing that would concern me. But I think at the level it's been introduced, it's quite difficult to see that sort of being raised very significantly over a short period of time.
I mean, what was rather interesting is we had a buyer in the week leading up to the budget who was going to make their decision based on the outcome and said, look, give us till, the budget was obviously on the Wednesday, they said give us to the early part of next week and we'll know the lay of the land and what we're going to offer. Well, it was quite telling the fact that they actually offered on Wednesday afternoon, because they came back and said, look, nothing really came out of it, so we'll just crack on and offer, which has been good. And we've actually seen a number of exchanges post-budget. Market still continues.
Do you think there'll be any friction around sort of threshold properties, so properties around the 2 million mark at the different bands, or do you think it will?
I suppose it's still too early to tell. We haven't seen that yet. No. I suppose only time will tell.
Matthew and Ed, you're here representing the Lawyers with Us of London. There are couples out there who, perhaps they're later on in life or perhaps they're not, but they are unsure as to whether to sell their property or not. I'm not completely convinced that the budget has helped them make that decision, because the other aspect of things like budgets is there's so much involvement. Do they actually understand all the ins and outs of it? At what point do they contact someone like Withers? I mean, can you help people see through the quagmire of all these different aspects and costs?
I mean, from a property perspective, and perhaps Matthew, you can talk a bit more about the tax and trust side, but from a property perspective, we urge buyers and sellers to contact us just as soon as possible. And really, there are two elements to that. The conveyancing process itself is not perfect, and what we tend to find that there is inherently inbuilt delay into the process. So, for example, getting a local search, getting information from the local council, and all of that can be done quite seamlessly and with very little cost at an early stage if you have the time to do it. So whenever we have clients coming to us asking to sell, we always tell them to prepare a really comprehensive pack, do your replies to inquiries and get a set of searches. And then the second thing that allows us to do is issue spot. And that's really important, because if you spend a little bit of time just having a look through it, you can generally pick up 4 or 5 points which may become an issue during the transaction. And quite often they're resolvable and quite quickly. But what you don't want is those points becoming a pinch point at the point of when you're trying to exchange contracts. And so with a bit of planning, you can just iron out so much of the delay that buyers and sellers get frustrated with conveyancing. And I think the other point just to make is that I think people are often sometimes apprehensive about incurring legal fees for doing that at an early stage. But actually, I genuinely think that in the long run, it makes the transaction smoother. It's much more likely the transaction will go down. And I think it also has the end result of lowering your legal fees. And Matthew, I don't know if you've got...
No, I'd echo that. Whenever I'm talking to individuals as families and you're wanting to, a transaction to happen quickly, then having that sales, as a seller, having that sales pack done well in advance with the help of the agents and so forth is really important, because it gives you the maximum chance of success. And I forget who was it, Churchill, who said, time spent on reconnaissance is seldom wasted. And I think this is a classic case of that. If you spend the time on it, you can identify those issues. And when someone gets excited and puts in their offer, you've got everything there and every reason, and there's no excuse really for that transaction to not happen. If midway through that they suddenly find these wrinkles, it just creates delay and it gives them the opportunity to change their mind. And I think from a buyer's perspective as well, you want to say, actually, I've got this, it all looks clean and it's all straightforward. And so, you want to just get on. You found your dream house, you want to buy it, you don't want to be there several months down and then suddenly you find it's, rather too difficult.
I mean, I couldn't agree more on those points. I mean, actually, as agents, whenever advising a client, we will always say, instruct your solicitor, actually pre-instructing your agent, just to get, time kills deals. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. And if you can just take away a few of those hurdles and make the process smoother, you've got a far better chance of getting to a successful outcome.
I was thinking that the two gentlemen for Withers were giving you very good advice there. You mentioned about issues. Somebody watching might think to yourself, well, what is an issue? And Ben, I wanted to just have a chat with you about that, because as an example, or maybe you could give us some examples, but there's a footpath that was moved 25 years ago that didn't actually have permission to move. There's a boundary that's never been completely decided because a hedge or some trees have been disappeared. Are these the kind of things people should be looking at?
Absolutely. I mean, Drainage, for example, that's something that is a hot topic. Not the most exciting of topics, but it is something. Whether or not your drain's compliant, whether or not if works have been done, whether building regs have been obtained, it all causes delay. And actually, the more delay there is, then the buyer starts questioning, oh gosh, is there something else that's not been unearthed? You just got to give the buyer confidence. And all these things take time. And it's not a case of a matter of hours to sort them out. They can be weeks, if not months.
I've just had one very recently where a client, they'd sold the big house and we hadn't dealt with it, and the lawyers who dealt with it hadn't reserved rights over a septic tank on the remaining property which they were trying to sell. They then looked at the planning on the garage unit that had been built, and it was built in the wrong place, and some of it was actually on neighbouring land. And there was a good relationship there with the neighbours, and actually they're able to sort it out without any payments passing hands, because clearly the neighbour knew that it had been built there and wasn't going to take advantage of the situation. But you put that to market and a buyer sort of looks at it and says, well, I've got no access to my septic tank, I've got a building on someone else's land. It's not really instilling confidence.
And I think actually, whilst a lot of sellers will not think there are any issues, I think you two will probably agree, 9 times out of 10, there is always something. Very rarely do you get a sale which is completely smooth, clean title, no issues whatsoever. It is always worth having that conversation, because it might be something's unearthed that actually you as a seller are not aware of.
And the difference between a transaction when that is done early doors and when that is not done, it's just such a completely different experience for everybody involved. It's actually quite enjoyable.
I think, as you were saying as well, Ben, 9 times out of 10, most things are resolvable, but they just take time. And I think the other thing is that, and you slightly alluded to it, and as you were saying earlier, but discovering something at the last minute always makes it 10 times worse. Absolutely. And I think actually, if you're open up front about something at the outset, then everyone understands it and they can get their head around it. And it's much more manageable, whereas that thing coming up at the last minute is a real deal killer.
And Ed, presumably you find the land registry is not particularly helpful in terms of dealing with things in a timely fashion, which again just undermines confidence in everything. You find your issue, it's resolvable, but then you're sitting there waiting for the land registry to do something with the piece of paper you've sent them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the land registry does have a degree of lag in terms of dealing with applications. So again, if you're ever going to be dealing with property and titles, particularly where there have been other transactions involved. So, for example, if you had an estate and they've sold off cottages, it's always just important, absolutely, to double check that all of those are being registered and where necessary to request that they're expedited, so you don't have this issue.
And part of what Ed and I do is we sort of look forward. We see our clients as people, relationships that that we live and breathe. They're not just a transaction. We put it in the box and forget about it. So. We've had a number of clients who have been poorly, and we've been planning for their wills, but we've also been looking very much at the property aspects of it. So I had one actually not a million miles from here, where we knew that they were going to want to sell the property quickly because it was expensive to run and maintain with staff and so forth. And so we transferred the legal title into the names of the 2 adult children who were going to be the beneficiaries. There's no transfer for tax purposes, it was just literally holding it as a nominee and a bare trustee, but the legal title was in their names, so that as soon as the date happened, they were able to transact with the outside world, because that's what the buyer is looking for, is who's on the legal title. And so we weren't going to get rolled up in 9 months of probate and so forth, which was really important for them.
If somebody was going to put their property on the market, then can they call either yourselves, Ben, the Country House Department, or indeed Withers or similar companies, and maybe get a checklist? Can you think about, they might have been there for 2 or 3 generations, as I say, but a checklist of things that they ought to make sure are in order. Is that something that can be supplied?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we quite often have a comprehensive index for a data room, and actually that's a very good starting point. You can start with your title, your replies to inquiries, your searches, and then ancillary documentation. So yeah, we're very happy to help with those sorts of inquiries, with buyers and sellers.
Yeah, likewise. Yes, I mean, we will be able to advise when we're going around. And also, we have to remember that a lot of the people who are selling houses may have lived there for 20, 30, 40 years and not be aware of the process. And probably where there used to be 2 questions asked, there'd now be 10. So there's a lot of hoops to jump through. So absolutely, we're very happy to advise.
And there may have been things that didn't come up where they purchased the property because it was missed. And all of a sudden they go, we didn't know about that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And why should they? You know, we do it on a day-to-day, and they might do it every 10 years. So we will be able to help, all of us be able to help answer those questions. They're not necessarily going to know.
So the key message from the last couple of minutes is, and Ed and Matthew both uses, is planning. It's trying to get your ducks in order before you actually go to the market.
The best sales are those that are planned in advance, and the longer you've got to plan and get everything in order, the better.
And I think that flows through to everything, you know, because if there are tax issues, you know, main residence relief, stamp duty, you know, advice, you know, if they've already bought the property and they come to you and say, right, how should we have bought it, Matthew? Well, it's too late. So, you know, on the buying and selling side, and obviously on the acquisition and selling side from a legal perspective, you know, early advice is absolutely essential, and it's exactly the same for the sort of planning that I do and help families with.
I think actually, part of our job is matchmaking our clients, taking our clients under our wing. And yes, we're estate agents, but we have very good relationships with lawyers, with accountants, people that they need to speak to, people that we have tried and tested. And I think that's what's so important about what we do, is taking those clients under our wing who don't do it on a day-to-day and matchmaking with them with the right people so that the process is as smooth as possible and they're getting the best outcome that they possibly can. And that's what these relationships are really important. And we know who we know and trust, and we can make those introductions.
Well, we know that, you know, death, divorce, you know, are very stressful events in one's life, but buying and selling property is also up there, always on that list. And so I think the message we're saying here is that we can help make that less stressful and easier for everybody.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes left of the webcast, so I think it would be a good idea to get a soundbite from each of you as how you see the current situation. Ben, let's start with you.
Ever the optimist, and I would be as I am an agent, I do look at 2026 as being a good year to sell. And there is this old adage that you should launch your house in the spring, summer, when there's leaf on the tree and gardens are looking at their best. But we've got to remember, actually, leaf doesn't appear until sort of mid-May, and gardens won't look their best till June, July. You've slightly missed the market by then. I think people will make plans for the next year pretty early. They don't wake up on a sunny day in May and think, right, I'm now going to go and buy a house. That decision's been made over the Christmas period, and they'll want to get going pretty early when we come back in the new year. So my advice would be, get your house into the market. Don't gamble on a market. I think we're going to be in for a good period, so get on with it sooner rather than later.
I think for me, now we have clarity. The market's settled, prices have readjusted last year. Now probably is a good time to buy if you find your dream home, rather than waiting. Look at the long-term goal here. This will be your family home. You're going to live in it for a long time. Don't just look at the here and now. I do think it's a good time, but do look at the bigger picture. We don't know what's going to come in the long run, but if you find what you like and it works for you, then my advice would be to get on and to purchase that.
So it's great to be through the budget. We've endured a lot of speculation in terms of what may or may not have come. And actually what we've now seen hasn't fundamentally changed how properties will transact or the taxes that are payable on it. But I think my lasting remark is, whether you're a buyer or a seller, then please do, get in contact with us as soon as possible. I think we can do a huge amount to help smooth transactions and make them as painless and simple as possible.
I would echo that from a private client lawyer's perspective. I think that we've heard that there's stability in the market. We hear that it's a good time to buy and sell. And as Ed has said, I think getting your ducks in a row before you go to market or before you go is really important. And so I think that due diligence is absolutely critical to make this as stress-free a process as possible.
Well, thank you all very much indeed for the insights of Matthew and Ed from Withers of London, and Poppy and Ben from the Country House Department. Well, that's been some very interesting insights into the country house market since the budget last week. And I think the key message that I have learned from it is, if you're in a position to be able to plan your move, do so and take the best advice that you can. Thank you so much for joining the webcast from the Country House Department. It's been great to have you with us. Good luck.
A whole world awaits. A world full of fantasy, flair, and freedom. It belongs in the beauty of the country. Its heart beats in this house. We hosted, we laughed, we loved, worked, cried, cared, and played, and we lived. For you, may all this and more be true. Take it and make it yours. There is a world awaiting you within these walls.